Fire is drawn, as you know, with a little triangle. It's the lightest of all of the elements. Hot and wet combines with the next heaviest element, air. And air is just an upward pointing triangle, and the upward point designates the direction that these elements are thought to go. Fire and air are the most spiritual of the four elements, and they're naturally trying to get back to the heavens, which is the realm of the spirit here. And it has this bar on it, which I figured out after a while, it's a little weight. It means air is heavier than the other one that's going up. So we have wet and cold give us, of course, water, which is a downward pointing triangle. Water goes down and spreads. Air goes up and spreads. That's the combinations of these vectors, and fire just goes up. So it doesn't have the secondary vector checking it. And then cold and dry combine to give us earth, which goes down, and there's our little weight. Earth is the heaviest of these, so they go counterclockwise in terms of lightest to heaviest. So this is the heaviest element, cold and dry earth, and goes straight down. So that's the sort of ground division from the ground up. And then if we just sort of start with that, that gives us the theory of the four elements upon which not only alchemy was based, but the entire great chain of being, the sort of ground floor of it. And if we sort of, let's say we do it this way, and we go, earth is traditionally represented by a cross, and the cross represents all kinds of things here. It represents not only the four directions, north, south, east, and west, but as we've seen, it represents, for the Greeks, the four elements. And this is the earth at the center of the universe. The earth is sort of like a pendulum, the heaviest part on the whole machine that holds the whole thing together. And so we start with earth, and then the next sphere immediately out from the earth is the moon. This is the only element in the Copernican cosmology, in the Ptolemaic cosmology, that carries over into the Copernican, because the moon does revolve around the earth. So then we ascend, and the soul, by the way, we'll look at this too in a moment, descends through these spheres toward incarnation, and the planetary spheres correspond to what the Tibetans would call Bardo in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Descends toward incarnation, picking up the qualities associated with each of these planetary spheres, and it's sort of covered by these densifying sheaths which enwrap it with materiality such that as it reaches Earth, it's so occluded by this dense material substance that has infected the soul that you have forgotten the divine origin, the knowledge of the structure of the heavens that you were born with. So the task in this classical theory of education, which goes back at least to Plato, is that education consists in linking the mind back to this collective knowledge that was imprinted a priori on the structure of your soul at the moment that you came into being. And so Socrates, in one of Plato's dialogues, is questioning the slave boy, and he says, no, watch the way I question this slave boy. He will know how to solve this geometrical problem even though he's ignorant. And so he just asks him certain questions that get exactly the right answers that construct the geometrical problem, thereby proving that within each of us is the knowledge of mathematics. We're just sort of awakening this knowledge. And then at death, the soul also ascends back up through these spheres, dropping these qualities that are associated with it. The next sphere up is Mercury, and then the next sphere after that is Venus. And then we have the Sun. And then we have Jupiter. And finally we have Saturn. And notice that, I forgot Mars, which is in between Jupiter and the Sun, so that we have three planetary spheres above the Sun and three below it. So in a sense, the Sun always was in the middle of things. Just depends on how you look at it. And then above that, we have the realm of the fixed stars, which is where the ecliptic is and all the constellations and so forth. And then when we get into Christian worldview, you have the Empyrean, which is where God dwells. So that's what the universe looked like. And the way in which this works is that we've seen what the directions of the four elements are. And the fifth element is actually ether. And these are actually gigantic crystalline spheres made out of this substance ether, and the natural direction of ether is circular. So that it is the nature of the substance out of which the planetary spheres are made to turn the spheres with perfect, undissipated circular motion. They don't need angels yet. The Christians come in and add the angels to this, but at this point it's not necessary because it's the nature of the spheres to turn, because that's what they're made up out of. And there's these sort of gigantic crystalline substances with the planet like a little tiny air bubble and the sphere turns and carries the planet along with it. And so that's the Ptolemaic vision of the cosmos from this point of view. And what I want to do then is go to the philosophical version of this, which was propounded by Plotinus. And this is what the sort of Greeks signed off with. Because once you get to Ptolemy 150 AD, classical civilization is winding down. The Roman Empire is sort of, 150 AD is the time of the reign of Marcus Aurelius, and that's where Gibbon begins his history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, right at that moment with Marcus Aurelius. The whole thing is beginning to crumble and fall apart. And the Greeks as thinkers are done by this point. In fact, as Spengler will argue, they'd been done long before. Ptolemy was just a collector of ideas, and so was Galen for that matter. They were just collecting ideas that had already been put together by their predecessors. But this is what they signed off with. Plotinus represents actually a sort of whole new culture, a whole new worldview. Even though he wrote in Greek, he lived in, I believe, the 3rd century AD. And Plotinus was an interesting man because at this point he was living in Alexandria, and Alexandria was the fashionable center of learning in this period. And he was Greek, and his teacher was Ammonius Saccas in the academy at, or rather in the museum, the Hall of the Muses, which was the place where the Alexandrian education went on. His teacher, Ammonius Saccas, was very much interested in synthesizing Plato, Aristotle, and the Hindus. So already at this point, the West was becoming interested in the East. Buddhist monks, this whole period from about the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD, the old Silk Road was open from Shanghai, China, clear over to Cadiz, Spain. And the Buddhists had been sending missionary monks out along this road for probably shortly after the time of Ashoka, about couple of 2nd century BC. And so the West was already encountering the East, and then Alexander, in response, as it were, to the sort of Buddhist incursion, then went on his campaigns in 300 BC, went and then sort of conquered Egypt and then conquered India, and the entire world, what was called the ecumene, was sort of introduced to Greek culture. And this culture entered into its cosmopolitan period, and there was this incredible interchange of ideas and thought and traffic, merchants exchanging ideas, philosophers exchanging ideas. So there was this interest, similar to what's going on today. So what happened was Plotinus was very interested in going to India to study with the Hindus, and he even hitched a ride with a Roman contingent of soldiers who was on their way to India, but the contingent never made it there, and they wound up in Persia. And so he never did make it. But his teacher, Ammonius Saccas, had fired his enthusiasm with the learning of the Orientals. And so what he ended up doing was sort of creating a synthesis of Plato and the Hindus, more so from Plato than from the Hindus. And what happens is you have the translation of this pictorial image of the structure of the cosmos into its philosophical equivalent. So with Plotinus, you're dealing with concepts, not so much with images, but with concepts. And he sort of starts at the top here with his vision with what he calls the one. The one. Now, he probably picked this idea up from the idea of Brahman from the Hindus, which is the fundamental ground of being that unifies everything that appears to us to be separate from everything else. That's all Maya, that's all an illusion. The real reality is that everything is fundamentally one. And it is the goal of yoga, for example, to enter into the knowledge of this oneness between the Atman, the self, and the Brahman, the self that is the ground of being of which we are a part, to achieve Brahmatman, the sort of knowledge of both, the two that are one. And Plotinus was said to have achieved this sort of fusion with the one on 3 distinct occasions. So apparently he wasn't very good at yoga, but he made the attempt, and he was more of a philosopher than a yogic practitioner. But this will correspond in the Christian version with God. God as the being is the sort of at the top, and with the Hindus with Brahman, although Brahman and God are very different ideas. But structurally, that's what he's accounting for here. Then the next level down we have nous, the Greek word for mind, and this is the mind of the Platonic forms. Plotinus comes in and retrieves all of Plato's forms. And, the forms are the archetypal structuring principle. Jung sort of revived this whole theory of the forms with the theory of archetypes.